Hey guys, something smelling like BO around here today, and no, it's not because I forgot to put on deodorant. That's what we've got to talk about today. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I'm Dave. Here we talk about investing in space stocks, and today we're talking about Rocket Lab, specifically a bombshell report that has been circulating the internet, just came out the other day. I wasn't sure at first if I should talk about it because it seemed like the kind of thing that's supposed to remain private, and indeed large portions of it are redacted, but it seems like it's out there all over the place now. So, the cat's out of the bag, and we really need to talk about it and try and put it in contexts. Basically, this report is accusing Rocket Lab of massive dishonesty and lying to shareholders, lying to the public, lying to the government. Let's talk about it. Let's see, is Rocket Lab lying, or is this coming from a competitor who is concerned about them getting on to the National Space Launch Program? By the way, Rocket Lab's also having quite a good day today as well on the stock market, pushing almost to $10 per share, getting close to that SPAC level when they first went public finally. So I'm sure there's a lot of shareholders from the SPAC days that will be happy about that. Although, of course, there's been some dilution since then. But really exciting day for the shareholders, and congratulations to everyone who is benefiting from that. Before we talk about all that, though, I hope you'll consider hitting that subscribe button if you're not subscribed already. Every new subscriber is very much appreciated, and if you're already a subscriber, those likes, comments, and shares always help out as well with the algorithms. Okay, let's dive into Rocket Lab's lying ways. So first of all, if you'll remember back in late February, if you were following Rocket Lab at that time, you probably heard about this congressional memo that was circulated saying Rocket Lab was misrepresenting Neutron's launch readiness. So back at that time, Rocket Lab was still targeting end of 2024 to hopefully get off a first launch. And this was a key date because this massive national security launch program called the NSSL has a lane which is on-ramping new providers to launch government and national security payloads. Now, the deadline was coming up, I believe it was like September-ish, and basically new entrants could be on-ramped if they had a credible path to launching by December of 2024, so December of that year. And the debate was, well, Rocket Lab's still saying they're going to try to launch by 2024. Other people saying their path is not credible, they don't have a credible chance of launching, and therefore they shouldn't be on-ramped this year. And it really seemed to come down to people already on the program trying to make sure Rocket Lab stays out of it and doesn't get any launches. Now, of course, later on, Rocket Lab did adjust their target first launch date to mid-2025, so they are not on-ramping into the NSSL program this year. But you might want to ask yourself, let's say Rocket Lab did know that they weren't going to be able to launch by December 2024. Well, what's the benefit of on-ramping to this program because your rocket's not ready? The answer is that you can only have one opportunity to on-ramp each year. So if they miss that 2024 cutoff, which they ended up doing, that means they have to wait until September 2025 to on-ramp. Say their rocket actually comes online, early 2025 or even summer of 2025. If they had gotten into the program, they could theoretically get some launches before they get the opportunity to on-ramp the following year. So, theoretically, there is a little bit of benefit to getting on-ramped, even if you don't think your rocket will be ready at that time, just in terms of the gap of that full year to waiting a following year to get on the program. Now, NSSL, I've talked about it many times before. It's an absolutely massive program, very key to Rocket Lab and pretty much any rocket provider getting on here. The key to tons of revenue, so very important for them and understandable why they and everyone else wants on the program. At the time this previous memo came out, seemed pretty clear to me it was being influenced by potential competitors, and its politics going on. Probably was submitted by a politician who is in the district where one of those potential competitors has a lot of jobs and they have strong connections or sway. At least that's how I read it. But there's been an update to it today, and that's what we're really focusing on. So let's dive over to that. I'm still not sure about sharing the entire document with you guys, but if you really want to find it, I'm sure you'll be able to on Discord, on Twitter. It's being shared around certain circles. So yeah, if you participate in Twitter, Discord, I'm sure you can find it if you look hard enough. But I'm going to start off by sharing a few quotes from this document, which was released on September 6th, so fairly recent. And the first section is titled that Rocket Lab continues to mislead government customers and investors. Okay, so let's go ahead and read through a bit of this report. I'm just going to do a few quotes because this is actually several hundred pages long, although some of them are appendices and talking about environmental reports and assessments and things of that nature. Starting off with here, we have, after finally giving up on the 2024 readiness lie following the failure of their now publicly acknowledged NSSL Lane 1 bid, Rocket Lab is gearing up to run the same play in 2025, despite clearly not being close to readiness for launch in mid next year. Now they're going to go through some of what they call evidence to support this, starting off with an interview Eric Berger had with Peter Beck not long ago. I'm sure if you follow the stock closely, you probably heard this yourself. But Eric asked how Neutron was coming along, and he said that when I look at other companies, when they test their main engine, as you're doing with Archimedes, it takes a couple of years to get to first launch from that point. Is 2025 still possible for a debut, or pretty aspirational? And Peter Beck said, look, we're pushing hard. We always run aggressive schedules. It's just the way the company is. We tell everyone the date is 2025, but it's a rocket program, right? This isn't our first time around the block. And there's a tremendous amount of Electron stuff that flows into Neutron. Few more things, but then it continues on. The date is tight, of course, but that's the way we roll. There's nothing fundamental preventing us from achieving it. So the report actually frames this as Peter saying that the date for the end of 2025 is tight, because Eric Berger asks, is a first launch in 2025 still possible? But I think Peter's answer is talking about his launch date. So he says the date is tight, and I'm pretty sure this is referring to that June 2025 date. So to me, this is really just kind of diving down into the semantics of how he answered the question, and I think they are intentionally misrepresenting or misinterpreting the answer. Continuing on, the report says this lingering risk hasn't stopped Beck from continuing to mislead investors and the government by hard starting their engine in a 1-second test following failure of an oxidizer turbopump several weeks earlier. Beck claimed in their Q2 earnings call that they have now brought down just all the risk really for a 2025 flight. But the so-called flight-ready engine failed catastrophically on its first test, a fact that has still not been disclosed to investors. Okay, so here, quick side note. A little while ago, and this is something I wasn't sure if I should bring much attention to either, Rocket Lab's VP of Business Development did hold a talk with some university students, and a lot of weird things happened around this. I feel like he may not have realized he was being filmed, and also at one point he had to hit Alt-Tab to go to another window, and briefly as he was Alt-Tabbing, some people said they saw stuff on his computer that they really weren't supposed to see. We don't have the full details of what they saw, luckily, because that stuff is supposed to be protected, and it has been. But the whole scenario was really awkward, and I didn't want to talk about it too much. But now that they're, quoting this presentation, I figure I should talk about it. So yes, Rocket Lab's VP of Business Development did talk to these university students. He said a lot of stuff, had a long presentation. Apparently one thing he did say is that they did have quite a short engine test, and I thought this was fine. Whatever, you start with short tests, you go up. He did also say that they are now going to, take some learnings from that, refurbish the first engine. They're putting their second engine on the stand and going from there. To me, this is whatever, all good. They're making some changes. That's why you test. That's why you iterate. It's kind of how things go, was, my thought process around the whole thing. This report, though, is saying that this basically means the first engine failed catastrophically. And that not only that, they're now just throwing the second engine on the stand, and they still don't understand the problem that happened with the first engine, and they're just being reckless about it. And that part, they really can't know unless Rocket Lab sources are telling them. It could be that it was an obvious problem. They know what it was, and they're now fixing it, and they're addressing it with that second engine as well. This part, to me, is just pure speculation, and really, I don't think should have a place in this report. But yes, I do believe the engine test was short, and, I'm not an engine testing expert. I've never gone through a rocket engine testing campaign. Maybe if we have some engineers who watch this video, you can tell me how normal this kind of thing is, if it really is a big concern. If Rocket Lab is trying to hide a massive problem, I didn't read this as a catastrophic failure, and indeed, if it was a catastrophic failure that the company was trying to hide, I really don't think their VP of Business Development would go in a public forum and tell people about it. So, yeah, I don't like how this report is kind of framing this. That I'll say that much. They also talk about how Rocket Lab has conspicuously withheld any video footage of that test because it was so short. And yes, I do think they haven't released video footage because it was a short test. And why bother, releasing a video of a 1 or several second short test? What's the point? So that part I do think is true. But, I feel like this report is combining things that are true and trying to put them in the worst possible light, as well as speculating on things that they can't possibly know. So it's a mix of truth and speculation here. We'll talk about this more at the end as we wrap up, but let's continue on here. So they quote Adam Spice on the recent earnings call saying, "We can't get to cash flow positivity on a sustained basis until we get the first neutron off the pad." The report says that by representing Archimedes and Neutron's readiness as a whole, Peter Beck and Adam Spice are therefore intentionally misrepresenting the company's timeline to profitability, which is a big thing for investors and the public, and kind of implying that the Security Exchange Commission should get involved and investigate them even on this misrepresentation, lying to investors about when they think they will become, cash flow positive. Continuing on, they say that a recording of the Wallops Environmental Assessment Kickoff Meeting, which was held back on April 29th, 2024, confirmed that Rocket Lab does not have environmental approval for the Neutron program at Wallops, and that the required environmental assessment will not be complete until December 2025. However, the report even admits that if Neutron is ready, then NASA Wallops and Virginia Space may attempt to use an interim written evaluation to bypass these requirements. So there is a path to launching even if that environmental assessment is not in place. To me, this isn't a huge worry, considering they even admit there's a path right there. The report says they think it's unlikely this will be approved because of the Starship program, but to me, completely different situation. And just because SpaceX is having issues with getting their launches approved doesn't mean you should assume that, Rocket Lab will not be able to get a single launch through while they're waiting for the complete environmental assessment. Again, not an expert on that, but yeah, the report kind of positions this as another piece of evidence saying why Rocket Lab will not be able to launch by the end of 2025. They also talk about the fact that Rocket Lab hasn't signed any contracts yet, which is whatever. I mean, Peter's talked about that so many times, so I'm not even going to go into it. They talk about Cadence saying that NASA has publicly projected Neutron will not fly more than 6 times a year through 2032, which I think they did in some report, if I recall correctly. But, I personally don't put a lot of stock in that. And then the report says this cadence is grossly inadequate to make a meaningful contribution to national security requirements in competition or conflict. Now, this part makes me think the report could have potentially, come from someone who's a supporter of SpaceX, because it says that even with those 6 launches, Neutron will have a maximum annual capacity to orbit of 85 tons, which is less than 1 Starship and the equivalent of about 3 Falcon 9s, which would take SpaceX less than a week. So, kind of phrasing it in the light of why would you even bother to on-ramp Neutron when SpaceX could take care of that in a week and Starship could do it in a single launch. I do think they're talking about expended Falcon 9s there as opposed to being recovered, so not really apples to apples, trying to paint this in the worst possible light. But just the pro SpaceX language here made me think maybe this is from, coming from a SpaceX pro source, whereas before I thought this had either Blue Origin or ULA written all over it. I was leaning towards Blue Origin personally, given their history of litigation and, using lawyers to try and slow down competition and things like that. Now, they also have an older memo here that came out on June 14th. And in this one, interestingly enough, they talk about other potential entrants as well, talking about how Stoke Space did attempt to onboard at that opportunity and saying how immature Stoke was and how they wouldn't be ready and stuff like that. Similarly, saying that Relativity would not be ready, how they had to, switch over to a hybrid manufacturing and abandon their full 3D printing, and how they canceled their Terran 1, and saying it is still unclear at this time how this has impacted their schedule, but they claim to be still on track for 2026. This is a dramatic departure from Terran 1 and deserves additional scrutiny from the Space Force before entering into any new contracts. So, they also talk about the challenges Relativity will have with barges and getting their large rocket to the launch pad. To me, that's whatever. Basically, what this comes down to today is it's pretty clear that this is not something being initiated by either Relativity or Stoke Space, in case anyone thought that it might be those companies behind it, because they are similarly under attack, although certainly not to the degree that Rocket Lab is in this report. And then finally, there's also some stuff saying the launch pad is not going to be ready, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's really quite a long report if you feel like digging it up and going through it all yourself. So that's kind of the gist of the report. The question is Peter Beck lying to us investors? Is he lying to the government, lying to everybody? And personally, I feel like you're not going to find a more honest guy than Peter Beck out there, a more trustworthy guy than him. He's a Kiwi. He's got a great reputation in the industry, and I have been very willing to place my money with this company. All that being said, here's what we have. Most things we already knew. Yes, the Archimedes test, I do believe, was short. Is that a problem? I don't necessarily think it's a huge problem. I wait to hear more information on that. Maybe it is a hiccup, maybe it is a bit of a delay, but it certainly doesn't seem catastrophic to me. We'll wait to hear more information on Archimedes. And it really just seems like, a political piece from someone who has got campaign contributions or something like that from a Blue Origin, from a SpaceX or someone else, maybe ULA, who really wants those NSSL contracts for themselves. And the thing is, if they weren't worried about Rocket Lab at all, if Rocket Lab didn't have any path to launching anytime soon, why do they even care, right? Like, if the rocket's not ready, even if Neutron is onboarded into the NSSL program, that doesn't guarantee them any launches. They get on the program, then they compete for launches that are in the program from there. So if they're not worried about Neutron not being ready, why bother smearing them and attacking them either? So yeah, something to think about there as well. Again, I think this document is a mix of some truth trying to be painted in the worst possible light, as well as some speculation and smear campaign, basically. Trying to hold my bias in check here because I am a Rocket Lab investor and fan of the company, but yeah, that's my read of it. Is it possible that Rocket Lab does not launch in June of 2025 and that, in fact, they end up launching December of 2025? Sure. This goes back to what is a credible path, right? And the fact that every rocket program ever in existence has basically ended up being late. So the fact that Rocket Lab's program may end up being late as well, it's like, okay, come on, guys. Peter Beck even says it's a rocket program. He says that several times, all the time. It's a rocket program. It's a rocket program. We all know what that means. It means delays are not unheard of by any means. To me, a reasonable path is even like a 25% chance you launch, though. Like, it's not saying they have a reasonably high chance of launching. It's a reasonable path to launching. But I don't think Rocket Lab is really a massive liar here for saying, yes, we have a path, yes, we have a chance, it's a green light schedule, everything has to go right. If the NSSL wanted to structure their program so that a rocket had to actually launch before getting onboarded, then they absolutely should have done that, and that's within their rights and abilities to change the onboarding process of the program. This is how they've decided to organize it, and of course, that just opens the door to all sorts of people trying to get on and saying, we have a reasonable path. What is a reasonable path? We heard that even Stoke tried to onboard, and if anyone didn't have a reasonable path to launching in 2024, it was pretty clearly them. So yeah, it's, it is what it is. The program really opened themselves up to this, in my opinion, by using that wording, reasonable path, as opposed to just saying, you know what, once you launch one successfully, then you can get onboarded. I don't see why they didn't just do that, to be honest. To me, this still does smell mostly like BO, I think, aka Blue Origin, with their litigation and lawyers. I mean, it's been well documented in the past. There's an off chance at SpaceX with the talk about how good and capable the SpaceX rockets are. I guess there's an even more off chance it's ULA. So on the matter of the SEC and whether they would be suing Rocket Lab's Peter Beck and management for misleading investors going back to that original timeline of end of 2024, I find it highly unlikely that they would make such an action. Did Peter and the management probably know before we did that a 2024 launch was getting less and less likely? Yes, probably they did. Were they ready to completely throw in the towel and give up on that schedule, way earlier when these original reports were written? I guess not yet. And, it's hard to blame them for that either. I think in terms of proving that they knew without a shadow of a doubt that they wouldn't be launching by the end of 2024, SEC would have their job cut out for them. And it also goes back to the language on a lot of the calls where they repeatedly said getting something on the pad as opposed to actually launching something a lot of the time. So even if the SEC did come after them, saying you should have known because this environmental assessment is not complete, well, not only is there that potential waiver for a single launch that they talked about, the written approval, there could be nothing wrong with having a rocket sitting on a pad if you're not launching it yet when the environmental assessment is not complete to launch. So the phrasing, having something on the pad, may as well be something that would protect them from any kind of action by the SEC. That's just my first take. I'm not a lawyer, though. But this ultimately goes back to how companies release information, right? Like, when a company is starting to think it might not hit its target, they don't come out and tell investors every day, update, okay, there's only a 70% chance we're going to get there. There's only a 69% chance, a 67% as things go on, and they start to gradually realize it's less and less likely to hit a target. All companies release information in specific times, in specific ways, and he did say several times it's a green light schedule, it's an ambitious schedule, it's a rocket program, things get delayed. I feel like it's very difficult for them to get sued for this kind of thing, and personally, I feel like they were fairly transparent. Anyone who's watched rocket development programs kind of knows what's up with them. So when they say it's a rocket program, I think if you know, you know, and most of us investors know the likelihood of these delays looking at any rocket ever being developed. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Is this stemming from Blue Origin? Is this just a well-meaning staffer writing this report to try and protect the government from onboarding a provider too early? They talk about the great risks associated with this, and that if they let Rocket Lab join, well, that's going to encourage other providers to join too soon. To me, there's no risk, because if they get onboarded and the rocket's not ready, it's just an unready rocket in the program, and they won't get any launches within the program. But yeah, that's me. Anyway, I figured this is definitely worth talking about. I'm sure we're going to see some articles coming out soon talking about Peter Beck's dishonesty, so definitely worth addressing. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Is Rocket Lab going to get sued by the SEC? Are they lying to us? Is this just political maneuvering, as I mostly suspect, with a little bit of truth in there, and that Archimedes might be having a little bit more trouble than they have let on? But to be honest, that's just standard company communications. Companies are always very careful about how they release information, how they position it, and the communications around that. So that's just, standard public company type stuff, if you ask me. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you'll subscribe if you haven't already. It would be very much appreciated. And I hope you have a great day, a great rest of the week. And I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.